Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, good morning, depending on when you're watching and where you're watching us from. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am really happy to be here with you on this particular day. At this time of this taping, it is Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the United States, and it is a day where we are celebrating the life and legacy of one of our greatest freedom fighters and heroes, as well as his wife, Coretta Scott King, without whom we would not even have a Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So today we just want to celebrate them and just talk about what it means to be Black people who show up and show out and just do things for freedom and beyond, especially on this particular day, which some of you know exactly what this day is. And like Ketanji Brown Jackson, I am wearing my cowrie shells today as a means of resistance against many other things that are happening around us. So with that being said, I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Patty, joining us from New York, but thank you so much. If you want to do like Patty did and jump in and let people know where you're joining us from, that will be wonderful as well. So I am excited about tonight's special guest because she and I both said, ain't nothing happening on January 20th, so let's come together and have this conversation today. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the book that we're going to be talking about, The Unexpected Diva, by Tiffany L. Warren. And I'm also especially excited because she is from my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, and actually found out we spent time at the same high school, but not at the same time. So I'm really excited about that. But in case you're not familiar with Tiffany L. Warren, she is a novelist, screenwriter, and film producer who began her writing career in 2003 when she signed with Walkworthy Press to publish her debut, What a Sister Should Do. She has gone on to publish over 30 full-length novels, 11 under her pen name, Nikki Carter, with several different publishing houses. As I've already mentioned, she's an Ohio native who's had a chance to move around as I have. And in addition to writing books, she also has a love for the theater, henceforth, where she is a playwright. And also in 2021, she began turning her books into films, which is another thing that many times authors look forward to having an opportunity to do. So she has been blessed to do that and have a couple of films that are on BET Plus. And tonight, as I've already mentioned, we are going to be talking about her historical fiction novel, which is based on a real life person that we're going to get into here in just a moment. And that book is The Unexpected Diva, which I believe is about 2 or 3 weeks old now. So we're getting in on the ground floor. So with all of that being said, and without any further delay, let's go ahead and bring Tiffany L. Warren to the stage. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We have some other shout outs. Okay, Paula from Illinois, and she's a regular here. And then we also have Shawana from our hometown. Hey, what's up, girl?
Hey, Shawana. That's my bestie.
Oh, that's your bestie. Hey, bestie. Cleveland in the house today. So, first of all, I just want to congratulate you, Tiffany, because
Thank
as I was
you.
telling you before we came on, I really enjoy this book and I am so excited to be able to talk about it with everyone and introduce it to those who haven't had a chance to read it. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. So what was it that drew you to wanting to write this particular story, The Unexpected Diva, and the person that it's about?
So I found Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield by accident. I was researching Yolande Du Bois, who is the subject of my next historical fiction, and I discovered the record company Black Swan Records. It was owned by her father, W.E.B. Du Bois, and it was in tribute to her, the
Mm.
Black Swan, which was Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield's stage name. And I was like, well, who was the Black Swan? And when you're doing historical fiction, when you're writing historical fiction, one of the things that happens when you're doing research, you fall down rabbit holes.
Right.
So I fell down the rabbit hole of the Black Swan, and it just so happened that I had done all of this research previously on opera because I am obsessed with opera music.
Okay.
18, I had gone, and you might know about this because you're a Cleveland girl. Bus trips were a big thing. When I was 18, I went on a bus trip to see the Phantom of the Opera in Toronto. And
Okay.
ever since then, I have been obsessed with opera music. I read a novel by Anne Rice called Cry to Heaven about the famous castrati. And I have just been obsessed with opera music. So I had another novel where I had done all of this research on opera singers, the just the process to getting your voice ready to sing opera music. And I told my agent, who was actually about to start shopping that novel. It was called A Multitude of Sins. I said, listen, let's don't shop that one. I don't want to do that one. I want to write
Okay.
a novel about this real opera singer. And so we
Right.
pulled that back, and I started to put together a proposal about this real singer, who had a three-octave voice. And I just couldn't believe that I'd never heard of her. Uh,
Mhm.
and to be able to discover her, that she existed during this time in history, this dark period, such a joyful and triumphant story of this amazing woman who had such tenacity during such a dark time. I had to write it. I had to write this story.
Yes, and it's such a beautiful story. And well, real quick, I'm going to show you who the real person is so that way you can see we are talking about a real human. Give me just 1 second. And here we go. This is the beautiful
Look
lady.
at
Yeah.
Eliza.
Look at Eliza, also known as Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield. So,
Mhm.
yes, that's the real woman that we're going to be talking about
Yes,
this
ma'am.
fictionalized story. So, with that being said, this is historical fiction.
Correct.
So, of course, in the book, you have a lot of author notes and historical notes and things like that to let us know kind of what your process was in telling this story. But because it's fiction, but you're dealing with history as well. Just talk a little bit about, as a writer, what that process looks like when you're taking like a real person
Mhm.
and trying to tell their story when there may not be a lot of source material.
So, particularly with Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, there was not a lot of source material. I was working with newspaper clippings from her concert tour. I had a lot of reviews from the critics. I had, particularly in the UK, she did a UK tour. There
Mhm.
was a lot of information on her UK tour. It was like the paparazzi, just like how the British press is today. They
Mhm.
were like that back then in the 1850s. As soon as she stepped off the ship, it was like they captured her every move.
Right.
Um, but there was more on her in the UK than there was here in the United
Mm,
States.
that's
And
not surprising.
correct. And so, and a lot of her, what I found written on Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield here in the United States was written for the white concert goers, right? And
Mhm.
so her shows were not integrated. A lot of her shows were only allowed, the white people were the only ones allowed to attend. And
Mhm.
so some of it was kind of, that was fluff, right?
Mhm.
So I couldn't trust it to be accurate. And
Right.
so I had to dig a little bit deeper and pull back the layers. And so, for example, there was not mention of Eliza's Black community in a
Mhm.
lot of the documents. So there was this one, the biggest source document I had was a concert flyer that was written just to give out to concert goers, that
Mhm.
was kind of like an unofficial biography of Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield. Well, it talked about her life, her getting on a steamship, going to Buffalo for lessons. It talked about how she was raised by Elizabeth H. Greenfield, who was her former mistress. It talked about her life, but it didn't talk about her community.
Right.
And We know that Eliza lived in Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a very vibrant free Black community there.
Right.
There was the Quaker community, which, of course, she was raised by Elizabeth H. Greenfield, who was her former mistress.
Right.
Um, Eliza was born on a plantation, and she was freed early in life. But there was that free Black community that I had to create because I did
Mm.
not have evidence that Eliza was a part of it because there was nothing written about it. So that was part of what I had to do. I had to go research, well, what church would Eliza have been a
Right.
member of? And she actually was a member of Shiloh Baptist Church. She was a member of that church until the day she died. And so I created um, a whole cast of characters
Yes.
that went to Shiloh Baptist Church, Mother Bethel AME,
Right.
because those people did not exist in any source material, but we know they existed. And so that it was the fiction part that I was able to create. Now, the things that we know that happened, Eliza was raised by Mrs. Greenfield, and she sent her family back to Liberia because when
Right.
you freed slaves in Mississippi, they could not stay in the United States. They had to go back to Africa because that was the law. And for whatever reason, we don't know why, Eliza stayed behind with Mrs. Greenfield and she raised her and educated her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot right there. I mean, just
Mm.
that little piece right there, it's a lot of history in that, basically building a world for her,
Yes.
to understand that, unlike today when we were talking about this before, like social media where you can go and learn everything about people's lives or whatever. Back then there wasn't, anything like that. So, and of course, with her being a Black woman operating in a space where Black women would not have been, they didn't really care about who she was behind the scenes. It was all
Right.
basically show up and do what you're supposed to do. And, we don't care about, your interior life or your relationships or your family. We really don't care about that in terms of creating materials for that, or I should say, where there would have been documentation. So I
Correct.
love the way that you created all of that for. We have a couple people in the room that have read the book. So, Patty, I literally just finished the book 15 minutes ago. Yes, what a phenomenal
Yay, thank
storyteller you
you.
are. And Stephanie is saying, love this book, found it so interesting. It
Thank you.
definitely is, a compelling story. I really couldn't put it down. I had to go do something else. But I was like, let me hear him get back to this book.
I love that. I love
Yes.
that. And it's so funny with historical fiction. When you read fiction, you're reading to be entertained. But
Right.
the lovely part about historical fiction is that you get to learn while you're being entertained. But
Mm-hmm.
you can't forget that storytelling aspect also. So that's the beauty of it. I get to do the fun part, the
Right.
storytelling part, the dangling my protagonist off the cliff, which is my favorite part. I love to put my
Mm-hmm.
protagonist in peril. I love to have them, have this goal that they want to reach and a moral and the thing that they're going to learn by the end of it all. And I
Mm-hmm.
got to give them a little romance too, right?
Oh
They got
yeah, there was some romance. Yeah, we're gonna get in. We're gonna get into all of that stuff. All of that stuff. So yes, Stephanie said that's why she loves historical fiction. And I feel the same way because I learned so much. And as I mentioned to you, I knew a little bit about her, but just it's more like there's facts, but there's not a lot that's really giving you any meat behind who this person could have potentially been.
Mhm.
So 100%. Yes, we appreciate the historical notes at the end. Yes, Janice is saying this is a must read. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you, Tiffany Warren, for sharing your creativity with us. And then we've got somebody joining us from Delray Beach. Hey, Florida, what's happening? So a lot of people are in the room, are have already read and are loving, and we really appreciate you being here. And we really
Yes.
want you to get out there and tell more people about this story because it really is a must read. So I know we've kind of talked about, what led you to the story. We've talked about, some of the process of what it means to, take, limited source material and build a world and those sorts of things. But for those who have not had a chance to read the story yet, just give us kind of a synopsis of what we are learning about Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield in this book.
So Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, she starts out the story. She is a young woman and she is taking singing lessons, and she has this three-octave voice. And her dream is to go to Europe to take singing lessons because she wants to be an opera singer. But at the very outset of the novel, tragedy strikes when her benefactor, Elizabeth H. Greenfield, passes away, and she leaves her with a sizable inheritance that is contested. And when that inheritance is contested, her life is thrown into a tailspin, and she doesn't know what to do next. And she has a bunch of options, right? She can get married to Mr. Lucien, her friend who's in the friend zone. She could be a nanny. She could teach, or she could pursue her gift. And she decides against all odds to pursue her gift. And it is not, without danger. She
Right.
lives during a time where the Fugitive Slave Act has been enacted, and this law allows slave catchers to come and to kidnap Black folks and enslave them on plantations, whether they're free or not. And she is worried, of course, but she does it anyway. She does it afraid. And during the entire book, she goes on a tour of North America, and she has lots of peril. She has to face protesters, dangers seen and unseen,
Right.
folks who, you know, will police her body, her morals. Um, they have there's lots of well-meaning folks. They have lots of advice for her. She also has lots of allies that help her along the way. And she meets this wonderful organ player named Charles in Buffalo at the Michigan Street Baptist Church, who becomes her voice of reason and her romantic interest throughout the book. And so we get to go on an adventure with her as she doesn't just discover that her gift will make room for her. She discovers her activism and her voice. And I loved going on this journey with her. And she finds her way from Philadelphia to the halls of Buckingham Palace, singing for Queen Victoria.
Yes, yes, and that is a great synopsis. And you're right. This book touches on so many different things. And I just one thing I do want to say before we even get into some of the. No, there's not going to be spoilers for those who haven't read it yet. So if
Yeah,
you're
no
thinking it's not
spoilers.
spoiler, we're not doing that. We're just talking about some of the themes and concepts. But
Mhm.
before we get into that, one of the things about this book, and I'm sure some of the people who've already read it can attest to, even though we're talking about someone in the 1850s and 60s, because that's kind of the timeline of the story that we're looking at. And we know that, Black people weren't even free, by and large at that point. We haven't even hit the Civil War when this
Correct.
story is going on. But even though it's happening in that time frame, the way that you have written this story, Tiffany, there are parts of it that feel current from the perspective of as women who have as a woman who has a goal or a desire or a dream, and being in a position where you have to make decisions about your life. And sometimes, here you can have it all. Can you? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, things like that you have to think about. In the book, I also, how do your choices impact your relationships if you do decide to be in a relationship? who's trying to dictate, what your success is supposed to look like, or take advantage of you to, to lift their own, profile. So all of those things felt really current. So I know it was intentional, but
well, unfortunately, Eliza lived during a time where she couldn't have it all, right? You couldn't have a family and a career. Like you couldn't have children and be an opera singer. It was one or the other. And so Eliza was always worried. She was on edge about having a romance. Like there couldn't be an unwanted pregnancy. There was no birth control. There was no abortion. So you were either a wife or you were a singer. And so she and there was no such thing as, being a working woman, right? That was not a thing. And so the choices that she made were really, really unconventional. But we have to remember the woman who raised her was she was ahead of her time.
Right.
Elizabeth H. Greenfield had been married twice, and she was in her 80s when she decided to free all the slaves on her former husband's plantation. And as a widow, no one expected her to do that, right? And she never remarried, and she took that wealth and then wanted to make a former enslaved woman wealthy. No one wanted her to do that, right? That's why it was contested. But this woman was a feminist. She said, I'm going to empower this young woman that I raised. I'm going to empower her to be able to pursue her singing career. And so Eliza made these decisions because she was raised to do that. She was raised by a woman who was phenomenal in her own right. And so Eliza made these choices and no one agreed with them. And there are several times in the book where Eliza is just by herself and making these decisions, and she has no one who agrees with the things that she does. But sometimes you are on an island by yourself making these decisions, and people think that you're crazy. But when you're a visionary, sometimes that is the case. And so Eliza had to do that. And I think the reason why some of this feels current is because not a lot has changed since 1850. We're still feeling the same microaggressions. We're still having our bodies policed. Eliza was a plus size Black woman. She had her gift compared to Jenny Lind, who was the other prima donna of the time, who she had a 2.5 octave voice. So she was not as good of a singer as Eliza, but of course
not.
Of course, she made 100 times more money than Eliza. And she was constantly compared to her in the reviews and in the media. And doesn't that just sound familiar to 2025? So things haven't changed very much. So it does sound familiar. It will resonate with Black women and women in general because things haven't changed very much.
Right. They haven't changed. And I know it might be hard for you all to see on this screen, but I love the fact, just speaking about her physicality, I love the fact that on this cover, she looks like who she is. That's a woman who's got a little thickness to her and all of that. Her hair on there isn't super straight. I love the fact. So just talk a little bit about that, because I know that you probably had to work with folks to get a cover that was a real representation.
Listen, the first version of the cover that they sent me, she was thin. I said, who is that? That's not Eliza. And my editor was like, "Oh, she is a little, she is a little slim, isn't she?" I said, "Yeah, Eliza was plus size. We need to
Mhm,
fix that." And they did agree, thank goodness, because you know, Eliza was very proud of that.
mhm, mhm,
She did not shy away from the fact that she was a buxom woman, and she didn't, that's who she was.
right,
And she was still beautiful.
right.
And if you read the reviews that the critics, there was constant talk about her her body, her needing to make sure that she was genteel, um
Mhm,
and those types of things were put into the reviews because they couldn't find fault with her gift. And there, you know, so let's pick apart other things.
right.
Let's uh, let's talk about her clothing. Let's talk about, you know, whether or not uh, whether she looks too sexual in her clothes, and clearly she doesn't. But that
Right.
what I don't know how much more covered up she could get, but
Right. Just looking at that drawing
she
there.
would get, yeah, she would get letters after her shows from well-meaning, well-meaning folks that would tell her you should make sure you're always wearing black,
Mhm,
um, to make sure that folks thought she was always modest because black women with curves
mhm.
tended to not look modest unless they were wearing black, So
Wow.
uh that's the kind of advice she got. And she didn't just get advice and criticisms from, you know, white people. She got criticized by, her brothers and sisters as well. In the
Mhm,
pages of the Frederick Douglass newspaper, she was criticized by about her own activism. You
mhm.
know, and this happens a lot because when there's a movement happening, folks want you to move the way they want you to move. And so
Right.
as Eliza's fame grew, people thought that she should, you know, break the doors down the way they
Mm,
wanted her to break them down. And Eliza's thought was, I should get this for myself and then open doors. And, people disagreed. But I love that Eliza did not allow anyone to dictate her activism.
right.
And even outside of the time period of the book, later in her life, she continued to be an activist. Her
Mhm,
biggest cause was orphanages, Black orphanages,
mhm.
because for all intents and purposes, she was an
She
orphan.
was. Mhm.
And she raised money, singing in Black churches pretty much for the rest of her life, raising money for Black orphanages. And that was her biggest cause. She also raised money for soldiers Black soldiers during the Civil War.
Mhm, mhm. So she definitely did a lot, in her lifetime, but it's just interesting, and there's so much to unpack there, just the
Mhm.
mere fact that, okay, she's got this talent and she's getting opportunities that a lot of people would not get, period, and
Right.
definitely not as a Black woman, but yet in this space, she's being told how to show up. And
Yep.
and that was something that came up a lot. And some of it, in some spaces, which I know can happen with many of us, it was like she was internalizing things at
Yes.
first. Then as time went on, it's like she became more confident, but like, yeah, you're gonna get these hips and you're gonna, whatever, you're gonna see this bosom because this is what I got. But just that whole thing. So I love the fact that this story, her story is told in such a way that says, okay, yeah, it's easy to buy into what other people are telling you it should be. Or it's easy to sit and maybe wonder, well, maybe should I, go ahead and get married? And, you have to read the story to find out what happens with that, a close call. I'll just leave it at that. But, but things of that nature are really like, okay, I don't have any other options, because that is a thing. To think the 1850s, a free Black woman who no longer has her patron to kind of watch over her, and knowing that she could be captured and taken back down south, even if she wasn't legitimately, she wasn't enslaved, but somebody could still do this. It's just a lot that she would have had to conquer. So I love Patty's comment. So I loved when Eliza observed that the only curve that Lucien's wife had was her baby bump while pregnant. So, yeah, flat everything. Unlike Eliza. But yes, it's just so much. And just to think that, of course, when she does get the people discover her talent, she has the opportunity to start traveling. Even that in and of itself, because like I said, this is the 1850s. And so, we didn't even have a green book or anything like that. So just even considering the travel and what that would have looked like.
So there was, even though we didn't have a green book, this was before, so it was before we had like Jim Crow laws, right? So that was before that. So she actually didn't have as many issues staying in like hotels as you would expect. Like she was able to stay as long as she could pay. So she traveled mostly in the free states. So there wasn't as much issues staying in hotels. She went to hotels. She stayed in very nice hotels, actually. And she stayed in Toronto. I did write some very interesting scenes that happened, because even though she was able to stay in these places, she did encounter racism when she went there. So even though she wasn't turned away, there was lots of encounters with racist individuals, even in the free states, even in Canada, even in the UK, because she still was a Black woman. We just didn't have those laws that dictated she couldn't stay in certain places. So, but it, she traveled with her white manager for the most part. So she didn't experience being turned away from places, but it still wasn't, the red carpet wasn't rolled out.
Oh, yeah. They weren't like, or even when they did, it didn't mean they were necessarily sincere.
Correct.
But just thinking about, the fact that she's out here and traveling and going to all these different places, because this US tour was like a 20-city tour. And even though, she wasn't touring like Georgia and Alabama, she wasn't down in the South.
She did not go to the South.
She did not go to the South. No. But even another thing that comes up is the whole issue of class, because thinking that, she's going to these different places, and 50 cents or $1 sounds like nothing to us, because it kind of is, but back then 50 cents or $1 would have been significant for people to spend to go to a show. And as you mentioned, with the other, what was her name, Jenny Lynn, people were paying even way more than that. But we do see the issue of class come up in addition to race.
Oh, for sure. And those shows, when the shows were $1, they were completely out of reach for Black folks to even attend. So from time to time, like they would have a show that would be 50 cents perhaps if they did it in advance, that she could, get some black patrons if they, did a show, but then the black folks would have to be in the rafters. And it was just the class factored in ex- very extensively. And Eliza, as she grew in her activism, she started to notice that, and she made a way for her folks to start seeing her in concert. And I love that her activism grew and her divitude grew as well.
Yes.
So
Yes, because that is something to think that, and we've seen things like maybe movies from the 50s or 60s when you're talking about Jim Crow. We've seen that. I'm thinking specifically like the Temptations movie where they first go in and like the folks are on different sides, and then later on in time, everybody is able to meld together. So can you imagine what that would have looked like? I knew that was probably going to happen. Lost one of the earrings, but fell off. But hey, it's here. But just imagine 100 years earlier what that would have looked like to even have people to be able to mix and mingle in the same spaces. But it also brings up the fact, and you and I are both Cleveland girls, Midwest girls, and all that, understanding that racism and all these other isms, just because it might not have been the laws as you stated, people still had to kind of toe certain lines and know their place, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, her shows were protested even in the cities where they were allowed. It still wasn't, even her performing in the venues was a problem. Her being there, some of the shows she couldn't even get a proper band because the band wouldn't perform, or the orchestra wouldn't perform. So it was, even though she was allowed, there was still issues in lots of these cities. There were protesters outside, there was violence, so it still wasn't an easy path even in the free states. She had it was a very dangerous thing to have this tour pre-Civil War. So it took a lot of tenacity and a lot of courage for her to do that.
It definitely did. Another thing, you've already touched on the thing like with her family being over in Liberia. So of course we know that's real. That's a real thing that happened. So I can't even begin to imagine, being in a situation where you think you might still have family, you're not really sure if you still have family, and you're kind of alone in the world with the exception of this one person who then passes away. So what I do love about the way the story is written, Tiffany, is that you built this world, you built this family, a chosen family, so to speak. Yes. There's someone, Mary, that she calls her sister, and then there are these other friends that she meets, in addition to, the couple of love interests. But you show that as well, and that just speaks to the power of community.
Yes, the power of community for sure. And Mary is actually out of all of the people I created, Mary is a real person.
Okay.
She is in Eliza's will.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if she was a true relative or chosen family. I couldn't tell for sure. But so Mary was real, a real person in Eliza's life. But it does speak to having chosen family, and a lot of times during the 1850s, we did have chosen family, especially leaving plantations. Even when they were freed, they had that chosen family because sometimes you didn't know the folks who were your bloodline. So chosen family was who it was. And Eliza definitely had that. She had that chosen community. And in Philadelphia, I love, there's a scene in the book with Hattie Fortin, who I just absolutely am obsessed with, the Fortin sisters, because I did not know they existed either. And this,
I'm familiar with Charlotte Fortin.
Charlotte and Harriet, also known as Hattie Fortin, when I tell you those women they are just, I'm obsessed with them. The Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, they founded it with some Quaker women. When I tell you these women were some bad women, they pretty much ran the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia, and they raised money. They had these anti-slavery fairs. They raised so much money taking care of folks escaping slavery and come. If they came through Philadelphia, they got money, they got education, and it was just a wonderful thing. And that there were free Black women that they, I mean, we've been exercising Black girl magic since then.
Exactly. Exactly.
We've been doing it. We've been doing it. And I've been saying this Nikki Giovanni quote in just about every one of my interviews, but I watched Nikki Giovanni say this, and I was like, this is so apropos for this story. She was talking about how Black women, no matter what, no matter how dark, no matter what level of oppression, we Black women always find ways to be joyful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so appropriate for this story because this
Yes.
was such a dark period in not just Black American history, in American history period.
Right.
This was pre-Civil War, Black folks still in chains, and these Black women had joy. Eliza's story is a joyful story, and it was important. When I was choosing to write historical fiction, it was so important for me to find a joyful story because there are enough stories of violence against Black bodies from this time period. And those stories are super important because we must never forget.
Right.
But I just didn't want to write that. I couldn't. And so I felt blessed to find a story of triumph that I could pen. And I just feel blessed to have found this story and to be able to give this as my contribution to this collective of stories about hidden figures in our history.
Mm-hmm. And that I'm glad that you brought that up because that is true. This is definitely not, I mean, there are things that are happening and there are moments where, you know, Eliza was afraid, we might be afraid for her just based on the things that are happening. But I could appreciate that this isn't, trauma porn, so to speak, because that's something that gets thrown at us a lot. And then we know that those things happened, obviously. But like I've heard a friend of mine was saying the other night we were out to dinner and it was a current story, a contemporary story. And she's like, I was good in that book until XYZ happened. And then I had to put it down because I was just in a place I couldn't read that, and it does get to be a point where enough is enough. You don't necessarily want to read that all the time. Yes, it's great to be knowledgeable and to know what happened, but it can get to a point where it's too much. And so a story like this is really good because we do get to understand that, no, it wasn't all, she wasn't just skipping around and people were like, hey, Black girl, come on in here.
Right. They definitely were not.
it was not that, but it wasn't like she was, always having to cower in fear or, run for her life type of situation.
Right.
So I can appreciate that. But, she is known as the Black Swan.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that name and how she came to be known as that as a traveling performer.
So first of all, I call her the Beyonce of the antebellum. Okay, let's just say that. But
because I use diva to promote today. So yeah.
So how she got the stage name The Black Swan, that actually came out of one of her reviews from one of her very first shows, because it was given to her as a compliment actually, in comparison to Jenny Lind, who was the Swedish, they called her the Swedish Nightingale. And so they were like, well, who needs the Swedish Nightingale? Give us the Black Swan. Because she was Black, and the swan is another bird. So they were like, okay, the Black Swan. We don't need the Swedish Nightingale. Give us the Black Swan. And Eliza was like, okay, I guess. So she honestly didn't really care for the name. She was trying to escape it while she was in the UK. They kept trying to not use it in her announcements. They were calling her Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, an American singer. But in the, in the reviews, they just kept saying Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, the Black Swan. So, the name stuck. And it was given to her as a compliment. But, it was in comparison to another singer. And so that's where it came from, and it stuck as nicknames typically do. So that's where it came from.
Yes. Well, I know because I read, but for those who may not have read it yet. Now, this last few minutes, I do want to dive into this whole romance relationship that is a part of this book as well, because, that's a part of giving Eliza a more fleshed out story. That's a part of, the tension and, what's going on, will they, won't they, what's going to go on, what decision is she going to make? Yes. I mean, because she is a young woman. She's like in her 20s when she gets started. At that time she would have already been considered an old maid, but that's a whole nother conversation. Like, well, you weren't married at 16, Yeah, that whole thing. But in crafting Charles, who was, her accompanist, who accompanied her, what was it about characterizing him in the way that you did that drew you to include him in this story?
Well, I wanted to have Charles kind of be like a voice of reason and to kind of help give her, as I outlined the story, I wanted to help him kind of, I wanted to have him help her kind of see the bigger picture of things sometimes, because Eliza, again, she had a lesson to learn by the end of the story, and she needed to learn that her gift was going to make room for her. She wanted to believe it, but she didn't necessarily believe it 100%. So she had that lesson to learn by the end of the story. And so he was there to kind of help her, learn that lesson. And he also helped her learn some things about her activism. He also helped her learn some other lessons. Some other lessons.
Other lessons, yes. Yes. Because I'm like, this is the 1850s. What is happening here? But hey, what my grandfather used to say, the things about boys and girls always remain the same. Ain't nothing
There's
really
nothing
changed.
new under the sun
Nothing
about
new
that.
under the sun. It's just technology. He said that's the only thing that changes. Technology and people running their mouth.
Exactly.
But the stuff that happens, that part has never really changed. But it was just interesting, seeing this person be a part of her life and see. That's funny. Some schooling did happen. Yes, some schooling. Y'all got to read it to know what we're talking about. But it really is interesting to think about it. And you've already touched on it a little bit, to be that, this is a woman that would have had choices to make. Either you go off and you get married and have kids, or, you pursue this career in her case. And like, what happens in the in-between? If you find somebody that you like or that you're attracted to, how do you navigate that? And then also just thinking about, we hear a lot of modern day women say, it's like sometimes, maybe being around a dude that doesn't support what you've got going on, or he wants to be in charge of what you've got going on. So we see a lot of these different dynamics play out between her and Charles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Charles, he's got his own story arc, his own growth arc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He comes in very rambunctious and very kind of assertive and definitely wants to be that guy who's managing things and running
Mm-hmm.
stuff a little bit, and kind of gets like told to sit down somewhere a little bit at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
um, but you know, I enjoy all my characters, and Charles
Yes.
was somebody I had to take him on a journey as well. So that's the thing about character development. I care about all of my characters, and Charles is one who he also had his own growth arc. So they had to have they had their own journey together,
Right.
apart and together,
Mm-hmm.
it all they had a journey. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to spoil the story
Oh
for
no, we're not going to tell, and Patty's not going to tell. The people who've already read it, they will not tell.
you. Don't feel.
But yes, it was definitely interesting to read that, to see the things that they were going to through, once again, whatever parallels there might be, but then also just to see the ways that things were different because of the time.
Yes.
And the fact that, and I mean, this isn't really giving anything away because you've already talked about, a woman having a certain level of propriety and decorum
Oh yeah.
about
Oh
herself.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So like not even, they couldn't even go on a date. Like, maybe nowadays people would go
Right.
on a date, or, if they're in the room together, people automatically assuming something is happening, even if
Hmm.
it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, you had to have a chaperone. If you were not married, um, and you can, there was no such thing as just going on dates. That wasn't a thing. So
That wasn't a thing. So wow. So yeah, y'all, please pick up a copy because this is such a good book. The Unexpected Diva. You're gonna learn a lot. You're gonna enjoy the story. There'll be some moments where you laugh. There'll be some moments where you'll be like, "Ooh, no, he didn't. No, she didn't." There's gonna be all of that because it's just a good book. And even for myself, honestly, as I was reading, I was just thinking about my own life and choices about, okay, am I going to, pursue doing X, Y, and Z right now, or am I going to put my energy toward relationship? Because even though nowadays, yes, I enjoyed the story. Yes, Michelle is really good. But nowadays we do quote unquote have the opportunity to have it all, but then do we really? So there's there's that too. Great conversation. Thanks to yes, yes.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, so I'm gonna segue a little bit because we've got a little not too much time left. And you've got so much going on, Tiffany. I would be remiss if I did not kind of talk about some of these other things. I mean, we can answer this question first, and then I have a couple extra questions for you. But do you plan to write another work of historical fiction?
I do. So I'm actually in the editorial process right now for my
Mhm.
next historical fiction that's called, well, right now it's called A Wedding in Harlem, although I think I might be changing the title, but not
Okay.
the story. It's about Yolande Du Bois,
Mhm.
the daughter of W.E.B. Du Bois, and her marriage to Count Cullen, the poet of the Harlem
Mhm.
Renaissance. And her true love was Jimmy Lunsford, jazz musician. So
Mm.
there's a little triangle that happens there. And so I enjoyed putting that story together. It's an amazing story.
Mm.
Amazing.
Sounds
So
good.
I actually researched that story for about 3 weeks. I stayed in Harlem,
Ooh.
and went to the library every day and read letters and walked all over and went to the locations, and then went to my hotel room and wrote. And um, this summer went up to the University of Massachusetts, to look at a scrapbook of Yolande's that was saved out of a storage locker somewhere. So
Oh, wow.
100-year-old scrapbook that I got to look at. That, oh my God. So that is my next work. It's already written. I'm editing it right now, so that comes out next year.
Okay, well, you already know. We'll, once you have firm dates, we'll get you here. We'll get you here. Cleta saying, in addition to this one, I'll definitely be on the next. Jimmy Lunsford was one of my mother's favorite singers. Okay.
Really? Oh, I love Jimmy so much. And he wasn't supposed to really be in the story.
Oh,
It was
wow.
supposed to be about Yolande and Countess.
Oh,
But
wow.
then when I discovered Jimmy, and that how much Jimmy was Yolande's true love, I was like, I can't not write that.
Yeah, well, that's gonna be good. And people love triangle. They love just like bring some drama into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love that. But I did want to ask you, because as you see, I printed off something you had on your website. You didn't know that. But one of the things about you, Miss Tiffany, is that you are a busy woman. You are a wife, you are a mother, you've had the opportunity to write plays, to produce film and all of that. And much of this you are doing with a full-time job. So just talk a little bit about us, a little bit about how you manage that and are able to, hold down two things that are pretty significant, because this is saying one of your topics that you like to talk about is a work balance. So just talk
work. Yes.
Yeah, many of us struggle with that, figuring out how to do that.
So I have a non-traditional schedule at work. And so I work like a 4-10 work schedule. And so every other week I have a 4-day weekend. And that 4-day weekend is my writing weekend. And then I typically, like every day, I jot down notes of what I'm going to work on during that 4-day writing sprint. So I'm not one of those writers who write every day. Like I don't sit down to my computer and write chapters every day. I write little notes down. And then every other week I have a 4-day writing sprint. So that's how I typically get my writing done. And some weeks that 4-day writing sprint is a 5-day writing sprint if there's a holiday that falls. Yeah.
Wow. And see, you saying that, it just helps me understand. And this is for anybody else. And it doesn't have to be writing a book. It could be any type of venture that you want to pursue outside of maybe a 9 to 5, that you just have to figure out how to make it work. And and have like some systems in place, and not to use whatever is going on as the excuse for why you can't, because you can figure out a way to make it work.
Oh yeah, there's no excuses.
So y'all heard it. Y'all heard it from Tiffany.
No excuses.
No excuses. So that's for me too, because I went to an event earlier today for the holiday, and somebody, they know that I do this, and they were like, well, what about your book? And I'm like, like I have ideas. Oh, it's not in here, but I have a whole like thing written out of what I want it to be. Yeah, I see you. I see you. So it's just a matter of me doing like you did, figuring out how to make it work. So it's for me, it's for anybody else who's thinking about writing something or just creating something, making space for it.
Yes.
Last question, just really quick. You have had the opportunity to produce some films and had a couple of your stories turned into films. So how different is that process from like your normal, writing of 30 books that you've written? What has been different about working on films?
So as far as writing screenplays, I outline my screenplays the same way I outline my novels. It's the exact same outline. But the difference between the producing of films is that there's a lot more people involved, right?
Mhm.
So me writing my novel is a solitary thing. It's me and the computer. But producing a film, there's so many other stakeholders and
Mhm.
lots of different, people that you have to make happy. And so it's a team effort. And I don't always get the last say.
Gotcha.
And so I have to be okay with that.
Mhm.
And I am, and I've been happy with the outcomes of those films. I I think when I look at them, the final products have all I've been happy with all three of them.
And that's good. I love to hear that because I know I've often heard people say, even with your book, it goes through these editing processes and things like that. And like, yes, it's your baby, but sometimes you got to give your baby to somebody else. And, it becomes like the village is bringing this baby, is raising up this baby. It's still your baby. And there are things like you did with the cover of this book that you have to stand firm on. But understanding that it becomes like a team project or a communal types of thing at the end of it. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that a lot of people watching might even be other authors who watch this and think, oh, I'd like to do film, but what would that be like? So thank you for
Mhm.
that. Thank you for that. And Shawana has a good comment, which is true. But if you're not familiar with this author, pick up her other books as well. Yes, she is an amazing writer and keeps you wanting more. Absolutely, because I'm already like, okay, I know you're talking about next year, but what else can I go and pick up?
Thank you.
What else can I do? Paula has
Thank
a
you.
comment. Thank you for a very good, interesting conversation. Love your positive energy, Tiffany. Yeah. Well,
Thank
she's a
you.
Cleveland girl, so
You know,
you
that's how
know.
we do.
We do. That's what we do. So thank you so much again, everyone. Please pick up a copy of The Unexpected Diva. I believe it came out on
Yes,
the 7th.
please.
Yes,
Yes.
it came out
Yes.
on the 7th. So tomorrow it'll be 2 weeks old. So it's still a very teeny tiny newborn. And
Mhm.
so we want more people to read it, to get a hold of it. There is also an audio book as well.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
actually, I
Ebook.
read most of it in like the last 2 chapters. I was getting ready to go somewhere. Say, let me just listen to this so I can be finished. But yeah, so there is audio as well for those who like audio.
Yes.
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 So thank you again, Tiffany.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
let you grab some water, but don't hang up yet. I just want to tell everybody who's gonna be here next week. So I'll be right back with you. Okay.
Okay.
And
Thank
thank you
you.
again. All righty. So that was such a pleasure to talk to Tiffany. And, as I've said, I will definitely have her back next year with the next book. And who knows, there might be something else in between that we can bring her into the space and be able to talk to us. So, yes, so I'll be spreading the word in Slack channels at work tomorrow. Thank you. Yeah, let everybody know, because, it is important for us to be able to tell our stories. And I love all types of books, and as you see in BGC Book Club, I bring in all different types of authors. But honestly, historical fiction in the last few years has become my favorite genre to read, because I do like to learn something. I do like to learn something about people I've never heard about, or a time frame, or something that I don't know about. And especially in days like these and times like these, with so many people are trying to diminish our culture, or take away our stories, it's so important that we continue to support authors like Tiffany and all of the wonderful ones out here who are telling great stories. And as I mentioned earlier, not just stories that will be traumatic to us, but also things that we can see our triumphs as well. So please go ahead and pick up a copy of The Unexpected Diva at your earliest convenience. And I don't have a picture of next week's book yet, but just to let you know, next week we will have Courtney Duke Foster will be here next week as our special guest. She was here a couple years ago now. Her first book was Passing Notes. So if you read the book Passing Notes from Courtney Duke Foster, her sophomore novel, Results May Vary, is now out, and she will be here next week to talk about that book. So I look so forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, in between time, if you are not subscribed to BGC Brown Girl Collective and BGC Book Club on YouTube, please do that so you can be informed of everything that is up and coming. And we got a lot of good stuff planned for the rest of the year. So I look forward to seeing you again real soon, and you take good care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.